Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining for our live Q&A today. I am here with Annie Gunning, and she's a new addition to our team at Hope for HIE as a child life specialist. So today's role of this Q&A is to talk about who she is, what services she's going to help with our community. So Annie, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this opportunity to be a part of this organization, and I'm grateful and excited to be here. So thank you.
Of course. So I'll introduce you just really briefly, and then we can go into your own kind of like career history and interest in what drew you to this job.
Sure.
So I know we were just talking, I was like, there's no way you look old enough to be a child life specialist for more than 20 years, but you have been. And you are so experienced, and you're also the owner of your own child life private practice, Empower Through Play, LLC. So if you could just give us kind of like a career overview and your journey toward becoming a child life specialist.
Yes, of course. Absolutely. Thank you. I guess I've been a child life specialist for about 23 years. So this started a long time ago. I've always enjoyed just working with kids. So even as a young person, teenager, babysitting, and I used to babysit for kids with special needs, and it was just something I was always drawn to. So that's always just kind of been a part of me. And then I went to school and found out about child life because I knew I wanted to work in pediatrics, but I wasn't sure what. So I learned about child life, got a degree, and the school I went to had a child life program. So my degree is in human development and family studies. With the emphasis in child life therapy was what it was called then. It's probably called something a little bit different now. And then I did a practicum, I did an internship, and then I first worked at Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital in St. Louis, which is where I did my internship. And then I worked at a small subacute rehab hospital for a while. Then I went back to Cardinal Glennon, and then we moved. So I worked at Hemby. I live in Charlotte now. So I worked at Hemby Children's Hospital for about 14 years, covering various units. I've covered the PICU, which is the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. I'm sure you all know what that acronym means. I've covered the ED, I've covered the NICU, I've covered radiology, surgery. The one hospital I worked at was a rehab facility. So we had lots of babies there that were trachs and vents, a lot of TBIs. And now I am currently working. So that was kind of more recent. And now I'm actually working at Atrium, which is another hospital here, but I work in the adult ICU. So I cover 5 adult ICUs working with children of adult patients, which has been an interest of mine, of working with children in the community who aren't necessarily the actual patient, but they either are, their parent is affected. So that's in siblings. So that's been a special interest of mine, which is why I switched and took on this position. And it's just PRN. And then I have my own practice.
That's amazing. And we're so grateful that you're offering your time and your services. I mean, we keep growing as a community, and we just want to find more and more resources to give to everybody. So your expertise is perfect, and we can't wait for people to start utilizing you.
Yes,
Yay.
definitely. As a community resource, that's kind of been my big draw for doing child life in the community, because there's need outside of the hospital walls.
Yes, and that's actually the perfect segue. So we're going to kind of divide this Q&A into a couple of sections. The first one is, if you could, I'll ask you the very specific question in a minute, but we're just going to give a general overview of just what a child life specialist does. Because in addition to you, I'd imagine a lot of parents throughout this experience are going to encounter them or seek them out. And then we can go more specifically into your role for Hope for HIE.
Yes.
So going back to that, what does a child life specialist do? I guess and I'll ask sub questions, but what's the main goal or responsibility?
Yes, the main goal of a child life specialist that you would encounter in a hospital or medical setting is to provide coping support to the child and the family in whatever situation they're in. So whether that's just like a long-term chronic illness, or it's something that came in and they're acute. So it's anything that they can do to help that child and that family cope with the situation they're in.
Got
And
it.
then I can move into more of, details of how that is done. But
Yeah. I mean, and that's, you might as well, because I feel like the next question is going to be like, what interventions might a child life specialist provide? So, yeah, any details you can provide about that.
yes, definitely. So to provide that coping support, child life specialists typically, do preparation for any kind of procedures, surgeries, tests, you anything that they would encounter in the hospital. So all that preparation beforehand, anything that they would happen to encounter. And during that preparation, we typically like to focus on the 5 senses. So what is that child going to experience through their senses? That's the best way to teach them. And we do this typically through play, because that's the way kids learn. That's the way they process. So we typically incorporate a lot of medical play, and then creative expression and education. Because not only are we providing preparation for some type of procedure or surgery or test, but also if there's a diagnosis that comes in, some type of new diagnosis, we provide education on that. If we've had a diagnosis, say for leukemia, we do what we call blood soup. So we get different types of the blood, we explain parts of the blood, and we do that with things that kids can visualize and touch and play with, so that they can understand on their level what it is.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. So a family typically comes into contact or works with a child life specialist more in, the hospital or medical setting. But could a child or a family seek out a child life specialist outside of a NICU or a hospital or medical facility on their own, or is it really just maintained in the hospital?
Typically, it's in the hospital. Historically, that's where child life has been. So if you know of an upcoming appointment, or you're going to go there, you can always request. Especially those large children's hospitals, most of them are going to have a child life staff. Even like the other hospital that I worked at was a children's hospital within, and we had child life staffed in certain areas, especially any of those units that touched pediatrics. So even in radiology. So you can go in, when you go in, do you have a child life specialist on staff? And I missed this part too, but sibling support and sibling preparation is also a big part of what we do, because we're supporting the whole family, not just the patient and the child that's there. Providing education for the parents as well, and supporting the parents is a big part of, an advocacy. That's a big part of what we do as well. So back to that question of where can you find us? Yes, always ask for a child life specialist in the hospital, but child life has begun to expand outside of the hospital into different areas like private practice, what I'm doing, and, dental offices, schools, even it's kind of starting to expand to touch on those kids who have medical things going on in their families at schools. But in most cases, it's in the hospital.
I know that you've also mentioned that, child life specialists can also work with not just the child who is the patient, but like the child of a parent who's the patient. I guess my question about that is there a typical age range where, or like a cap, like a minimum and a maximum of where like a child life specialist can speak to those children, or is it all age ranges?
We typically see those categorized as children. So 0 to 18 is our age group. So, and that's because up to 18 is when you can be even, hospitalized as a pediatric, see your pediatrician, things like that. So we do. And when I say infants, even, there's things we can do if you're taking your baby in for a doctor's appointment or a checkup. We can do, there's different suggestions that we can offer to help during that appointment, comfort holds or nursing during vaccinations, the sweeties, like there's different things we can also offer to help support infants. And then of course the preschool, all the ages, it's all very developmentally appropriate according to the child's age. So we do see up to teenagers.
Got it. If we could now segue into more of your role for our families for Hope for HIE, we're just so happy and proud to onboard you and for all of these supports. Could you give us a little bit more detail about the specific roles and services you're going to be able to provide our community, and then how they can go about seeking you out?
Yes, definitely. When we had talked, and I talked with Betsy, there's several different areas that we wanted to make sure we focused on. Sibling support was one, and I'd mentioned that. And when I say sibling support, I mean providing that education, teaching coping skills, things like that for the siblings. Like, what do we need to help with for the siblings to help them, cope with, whatever, if there's a new diagnosis or whatever changes or things are going on in the family, because the whole family is affected when one child or one parent is ill or has an injury. So definitely sibling support, any type of developmentally appropriate or therapeutic activities. So these could be done, I could send in things for the family. You can try these might be some good, education or therapeutic activities, or it might be a virtual session that I do with a kiddo. There's also any type of education for any kind of new diagnosis, preparation for procedures, surgeries, tests. I can offer the advice of, and again, this could be a virtual thing, or it can be an email or a phone call to a family, that the family calls and they have this coming up. And I would go through and talk about the main things to point on and what we need to focus on to prepare that child for the x-ray or whatever procedure that they may have that comes up. And then another thing is if there's anything that's going on in the home that they have to do on a daily basis, it's very difficult, whether it's just taking medication or they have a dressing change or something like that. And it's really hard for that kid. It's very anxiety producing. Like, what can we do to make that better? And if I can give a quick example, I have a kiddo right now that I see, and the goal for her was to do G-tube changes at home because when she goes into the doctor's office to do them, they're very stressful, they're very traumatic. She had a bad experience once, so that's been my goal of working with her. And we identified the big stressors, we developed a coping plan, we prepared for it, we kind of rehearsed it beforehand, and then we had the nurse practitioner come in the home with mom. And it was a long process. We didn't quite meet our goal of doing it in 10 minutes, which is okay. But we've made a lot of progress and we were able to change it in the home and it was less traumatic for her. So that was a huge step. So then when we talked to her GI doctor and told her GI doctor we did it at home, she was amazed and couldn't believe it. So there's things that we can do to make things go better. That's always the least, stressful and least anxiety producing as possible is always our goal.
Yeah. And I know, as you know, I mean, the families in our community have just a wide range of outcomes. So I hear all of these things about advocacy and sibling support too. Now, of course, we do have families who are grieving the loss of their child due to HIV. So is bereavement support something you can offer as well?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, definitely. Bereavement support and then grief, because those are two different things. Grief is when you're suffering from a loss of any kind, but bereavement is more of dealing with the death, the feelings related to a death. So I can provide support for both of those things, doing meaning making, memory making, legacy building. And again, it's the same thing. It could be a virtual session, it could be a phone call, it could be an email to provide that support. And also then any kind of additional resources. Are there support groups in your community, that I can find and suggest? Are there grief camps for the siblings that might be helpful? There's tons of things like that out there and a lot that I know of already. So I can always look if I know what area you're in and say, hey, this is a great camp and this is for kids ages 6 to 12 who have lost a sibling. So, and I do, even right now, I do have a kiddo that I see who lost a young sister, a baby sister. And so I see him regularly and we do some memory making and I help him with that grief support. And if I can backtrack just a little bit, I do have a contract with a grief organization here in Charlotte called Kindermorn. So I do grief groups at the Kindermorn house, then at school. So I do have a lot of experience just working with grief groups and bereavement with children who've either lost parents or siblings.
Okay, wonderful. So it sounds like the versatility of a child life specialist is just really broad. And so the best course of action for a family, now that you are with us and onboarded with us, to reach out with you, to you will be through email, you said, and then like scheduling like a virtual link or like a Zoom session, right, to talk. And we can make all of that information available to our community. on this, in the comments on this video, we'll promote it on our social feeds, et cetera, just so that way you're accessible and people know how to get to you.
Yeah, and I believe too, and I maybe need to double check this. I don't want to speak and give the wrong information, but I believe we will have intake forms on the website.
Yeah.
Child Life, like there will be a Child Life drop-down menu. So there will be different options for intake forms based on what type of support you will need. If it's, general support, if it's a bereavement support, things like sibling support, like I think there's a couple different ones. So you would be able to kind of give more specific information. That way, when that comes in, we'll have a little bit better idea of, what is needed and what to provide.
Awesome. And like I said, when all of those come available, we will promote those and we will get that information out there so that people can start meeting with you and you can start offering some of your support.
Definitely.
When a family does encounter a child life specialist, either you or like within our community or like in the hospital, do you have any general pieces of advice or recommendations that you'd give to like what would you encourage them to ask a child life specialist, for instance?
Yes, definitely. We'll say if you meet a child life specialist in the hospital, you can ask for support with a coping plan. This XYZ procedure is really hard for my kiddo. Can you please help us come up with a plan for what's going to make this better, or what options or what choices does my child have? There's always choices, maybe whether or not the procedure being done usually isn't a choice, but how it's done. And that's really important in those situations to give kids the viable choices. So they feel like they have some bit of control in usually a situation or scenario where they feel like they don't have any. You can also ask for resources if there's, a specific illness or injury that you're dealing with, or any kind of other issue that has come up that you feel like you need support with, whether it's another child in the home. What resources do you have for me in the community? They have access to that. If there were, again, I mentioned siblings, I have other kids in the home. Can you offer help for the siblings? What do I say to my kids? How do I talk to them? What do I say to them? I get that question a lot, and they don't know what to say. They can help with, I'm having trouble getting my kids to take this medicine. What do I do? Do you have any suggestions? What can I tell them? Or what can I bring to the hospital? What can make us more comfortable? What's allowed? Same thing with having a test done. What can we bring? All those things help with normalization and comfort. And there's things that you can bring that, you might think, oh, they probably won't let us bring this, but the child life specialist can help with that.
So it sounds like, in addition to helping these children and helping them visualize and add some normalcy to their situation, you really provide guidance to parents too. I mean, because a lot of those questions you just came up with are things that, if something happens in my family, I don't know what to say to my child that's appropriate. And like, I'm afraid if I say something that's wrong or I caused more damage and all of the worries, thoughts that come with that. So you can offer parents that help too. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I feel like I have this conversation a lot in hospitals, especially, or in my practice, parents will call and they've just had a diagnosis. And what do I say to my kids? And, I always say, I can give you the words and you can tell them, I can tell them and you can be there, or you can say it and I can be there to kind of provide support and help answer those questions that might be difficult, because kids start asking questions and then parents, they don't know what to say, which is a normal response, so that's why one of the reasons we are there, just to help support the parents and the family.
That's awesome. What tools, and you know what, before I say this, I'm just going to make sure that, because we really only have one more question for you. And so if there is anyone who's watching who has a live question, go to our main Facebook hub. You can ask it now before we let Annie go. And in the meantime, Annie, do you have any suggested tools or resources for our community members to use when it comes to learning more about a child life specialist, their role and how their family could use or benefit from one? Like, do you have like a go-to website or resource that you could recommend?
The Association of Child Life Professionals, which is our governing and our certification body, that's always a great place to go. They have resources on there for parents, for professionals. So, and of course, it gives a lot of information on just child life in general. And I already said resources, but that's a great place to go just to get general information about child life. There's a few places that I like that provide, just other things that offer, I feel like, good support for families. Are you okay with that if I say some of the things that I like to use?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
This is what it's all about. Yeah. Yeah. We want all of the resources. Yeah, of course.
So there's a great organization called Mighty and Bright. So I think it's just mightyandbright.org or .com, but they have great books and resources. And I really like this organization. And I've gotten books from there, and they have little calendars and stuff, but they kind of keep expanding into offering more books for children and for parents. Again, some of it's how to talk to kids, and it's feeling identification and stuff like that, which I do a lot of too, because of course, with all of this comes a lot of feelings and emotions. So that's where a lot of those therapeutic activities come in, identifying the feelings and the coping skill part of it. And then my website has a few resources on there. And that just gives, again, a little general blurb of what Child Life is and what I do to support people in the community. And then Child Life on Call, I think, is great. It is a great podcast because it is Katie Taylor interviewing other parents. And I have learned so much from this podcast, and each podcast has a title. So you can find one that maybe kind of fits the same diagnosis as your child and hear what other parents are saying. I feel like it's just very validating, and it's another parent talking. And I as a professional, I love hearing what parents have to say.
Oh yeah, I mean, and they're the experts of what they're going through, right? So
Right.
It's just as easy as getting in your car and maybe listening to it while you drive to go.
Absolutely.
I don't want to say it. Let's be optimistic, to go get a Starbucks.
Right. Right.
I don't want to say groceries or anything boring. Go treat yourself.
Right.
Zoila asked what the name of the podcast was. Child Life on Call. Is that what you said? Child Life on Call. And I'll make sure, if you missed any of this information, I'll make sure that in our key takeaways, I provide links, links to all of these, where you can find them. Oh, and Allison, she's such a wonderful part of our community. She said Child Life on Call, they're on TikTok as well. So there you go. Thanks, Allison.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, we're so grateful, and I can't wait to just start promoting you more and to have these families reach out to you and utilize you. And we're just, anything to help our community is something that we're all about. So thank you so much for joining us, explaining, helping us understand what you can do for our community. And we're just so grateful to have you at Hope for HIE.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to being part of this team. And again, like I said, helping, those in the community. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.